as an observer of the industry, I've been around a long time and I've worked in some big companies in our industry. I'd have to say that I see some of those guys going in a direction that makes sense. They're making investments in 3D and a lot of the things we've talked about. I also see some of those guys who appear to be sitting on their hands, not really making those investments.
Hello and welcome everyone to this brand new episode of the Auto Tech Show. Of course, our podcast that dives into the challenges and innovations around the automotive industry. My name is Mark Babin, your host, and as always, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the show. It's great to have you. And what a show we have for you today, where we ask the all-important question, what is driving the future of mobility and tire innovation? Now, obviously, we have a ton of variables involved, but by understanding these driving forces, perhaps we can get a better look at what should be the industry priorities over the next years and decades. Now, to help me decode this answer, I'm very excited to welcome a giant in the tire industry from Hankook Tires, with more than 30 years of mobility experience, including 20 years at Michelin and 6 years at Hankook. Guy Heywood is no stranger to finding success in both diverse and varying conditions. In addition to his fantastic work with Hankook, he has spent the last 12 years as an ambassador for Transaid, a charity based in the UK, with their main work being in Sub Saharan Africa, where they work on providing cost-effective, scalable, and sustainable mobility solutions for remote communities. A fantastic project. Definitely suggest that you go check that out after this recording, of course. Now, from charity work to groundbreaking product work at Hankook, Guy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for the little bit of time we have with you today. Really looking forward to this conversation. But yeah, again, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity, and it's a rare opportunity to discuss tires. We're hearing a lot of dialogue in the mobility industry about the new vehicles and a lot of innovations and technologies coming in that area, but we rarely get the chance to talk about tires, and tires are important. There are 2.5 billion tires sold this year around the world, so it's a fairly sizable organization, fairly sizable marketplace, but also the good news for the younger people is that all of those tires are being fitted to today's vehicles, and they will be fitted to those vehicles of tomorrow. But those tires will be quite different from the tires that we're fitting to the traditional vehicles today. Hopefully we'll get the chance to talk a little bit about what's driving the change in tires and also what differences there are for those tires for the new EV and the hydrogen vehicles that will be driving around in the future. So we're looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we see so many different driving forces, and we will dive into that. Now, something you just said, and I would love your opinion on it before we dive into the topic here, is people, like you said, tires are often forgot about, and it's often a forgot about element when we look at vehicles in general, whether it's passenger or commercial side of the business. Why do you think tires are that last thought for innovation, for technology, for the general population within automotive?
Well, as you mentioned, I've been in the industry now for more than 30 years, and I have to say the average person in the street really doesn't consider the complexity of the tire. I think most people would, if you ask them, they'd assume that tires are being pressed out of rubber in a machine, a very non-complex product. And the reality is that tires have more than 200 different components, different elements to them. They're pretty much handmade. They are very, very high-tech products. In fact, they're the only actual item that's touching the road. They're the things that actually transfer the power for the vehicles, make sure the vehicles get around the corners, and actually deliver all of the braking forces and cornering forces. So it is a critical component. But the reality is that the average person in the street sees it as a distressed purchase. They only really buy tires when they absolutely have to. And they never really think about the importance of those tires in their overall mobility solution. So that's something that I've been fighting to try to solve for the last 30 years of my time in the industry. And I have to say today, unfortunately, we're still in a stage with the average consumer not really taking too much interest and not really taking the time to understand how important tires are.
Over your time, have you seen that shift happen? Is there a shift happening, and is it getting progressively better, or are we still in a trouble point of view from your perspective where it's still not where it should be, or where you expect it to be?
I think it depends a lot on the segment of the tire industry we're talking about. If you're talking about the commercial segment, where the people we're speaking to are actually professional hauliers, that's their job, transportation is their job, they're looking at every single opportunity to try to get a competitive advantage over their other border competitors. Which means they take time to look at tyre performance. They take time to figure out whether it does help them to reduce their operating costs, reduce their fuel bills, and also improve on their sustainability in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. So they take the time, and in that area of the marketplace, it's easier for us to explain the difference between our tyres and competitor tyres. It's much more challenging in the commercial segment where we're talking about people in their own vehicles. Those guys and girls really don't have a lot of time. They're not transport professionals. They're using their vehicle as a way to get to work or as a way to have recreation. And they're really not open to so much discussion around the importance of tyres and the difference between one tyre and another. So that's the area where it's most challenging to make those kinds of communications. It's one of the reasons why most premium tyre makers are using motorsports to try to demonstrate their difference in terms of performance. And Hankook is part of that story with our sponsorship of Formula E, and also next year we're starting WRC to try to make sure that we can prove that our tyre performance is at the top level and try and get to those consumers, especially those new consumers. They're going to be buying electric vehicles, so Formula E is a perfect vehicle for us to do that.
Yeah, that education side, I think, is a constant fight everyone's fighting. But I think you're right, and taking those little steps are certainly necessary. And trying to close that gap as quick as can and bring people to understand the true value of what they're doing. I know, having done so much work in the automotive space over the last couple of years, it's really enlightening to have a better appreciation for the rubber that meets the road from the vehicle. It changes everything. It changes your vehicle performance, the safety factor, that sense of security in the vehicle as well. And if only everyone just took a little step forward, I think that's a big way to improve it. No, that makes sense, and it is good to hear. Obviously, there's two different sides: the commercial and the consumer side as well. So, yeah, I know. Obviously, the work you're doing is trying to address that gap as quickly as possible.
I quite often use the analogy of a parachute. I think a tire is like a parachute. If you said to somebody, "Would you like to buy a low-cost budget parachute?" I think they'd be horrified. But the reality of tires is they are the parachute for the vehicle. They're the thing that will stop you when you go for an emergency stop, or you take a corner at speed, or you hit a wet patch on the road. If you have high quality, high technology tyres, you have a much better chance of being able to maneuver out of that situation rather than have an accident. So it's very much more like a parachute. People should think of it that way, and if they did, I'm sure they would make some different choices about some of the tiles that they finish their vehicles.
Yeah, I like that comparison. That's very true. I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but it's 100% true. A little bit of danger added to the roadway. If you don't have enough tread, for example, like that car's just going to keep going straight. Just like if there's a hole in the parachute, you would maintain that as if it protects your life,
sure, yeah.
Which it does absolutely on the road. So good. It's nice to get that kind of point of view from your perspective. So thank you for that. Now let's move into the bulk of what we want to talk about today. And I want to start by talking about the future of the automotive industry, specifically obviously here with tires. We know there's this constant increase in the demand for sustainability. It's a word we hear at every show we go to and every conversation I have. Sustainability always comes up. Now, from the work you're doing and what you see on the front line, how are these evolving environmental regulations driving the need for sustainability in the tire industry?
That's a great question, and you're right, it is a hot topic today in our industry. And it has been for quite some time. In fact, all my 30 years, sustainability regulation around tyres and reducing the environmental impact of tyres has been there. And we know why, because if you look at the overall mobility industry globally, it represents around 20% of all of the emissions. And when you zoom in on that and look at where those emissions are coming from, about 60% from car. But my part of the business, which I'm responsible for here in Europe, is the truck and the bus and the commercial side. And they represent just 2% of the registrations of vehicles in Europe, but they represent nearly 30% of the emissions. So we have to, if we're going to be able to achieve the climate 1.5 limit that we set at COP21 in Paris back in 2015, I think, if we have to do that, then we have to be able to deal with the mobility industry and find ways to reduce the emissions. And that's been happening for many years. We started with Euro 1 vehicle regulations back in 1992, I think it was. They've gone to Euro 1 to Euro 2 to Euro 3, and now we're on Euro 6 vehicles. And we see huge improvements in terms of reduced emissions. More than that 80% reduction in CO2, more than 90% reduction in particle matter, about 85% reduction in nitrous oxide emissions and hydrocarbon emissions. So that's huge gains. But I'm sure you and your listeners will be very surprised to hear that despite that, despite those huge reductions, we're seeing more emissions today from mobility in Europe than we saw in 1992 when we started with Euro 1. So we've reduced significantly the vehicle emissions, but we've increased the number of vehicles on the road, particularly cars and also commercial vehicles. So we're not winning today. So we've done a lot of work. We need to do an awful lot more. We're seeing now the European Union and the governments around Europe reacting by bringing forward some of the previous targets that have been agreed. There was a new regulation ratified just this month where they're going to bring forward the reduction of CO2. It was originally 30% reduction by 2030. Now it's 65 by 2035 and 90 by 2040 to try and accelerate the adoption of zero emissions vehicles in the commercial sector, but also in the passenger car sector. And I think that will lead to increased registrations of EV vehicles. Today it's very low. If you're looking at trucks, it's less than 2% of the trucks registered last year were electric vehicle hybrid. In buses, it's a little higher, it's around 30%. So there's a lot of work going around. 30% of cars were EV or hybrid last year. So there's a lot of work that we need to do. But we're seeing more and more regulation. We're seeing regulation around emissions. We're seeing regulation around tyre and road wear particles, the wearing rate of tyres. We're also seeing new regulation around European deforestation rules, where we have to be able to prove all of the rubber in our tyres is coming from plantations that haven't been put in place as a result of deforestation. And this all means that there's an awful lot of development needed in the tyre industry. I would say that as a responsible manufacturer, Hankook are definitely supportive of all of those measures. It does lead to complexity, it does lead to cost in our industry, but we cannot argue against the need for it. As I mentioned, in the mobility sector, we have an awful lot of emissions coming from our sector. So we're working very hard as a manufacturer to reduce the carbon footprint of our factories, and we have a target of 0% carbon emissions by 2050. We're looking for 100% sustainability of our products by 2050 also. But there are some technical challenges that make that quite difficult. It is quite a long way away, 2050, but I'm sure we'll get into discussing that. But certainly, we're very supportive of the regulation, and we're working hard to make sure we meet it. And I think of all of the manufacturers globally, we've been recognised as one of the leaders by Standard & Poor's, and also by the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We're regularly recognised as one of the top people in the industry in terms of our sustainability our drive. So I'm very pleased that we're going in the right direction as fast as we can.
Yeah, I think change, like this type of change, when there is regulatory motivation behind things to meet certain goals by certain times, what is set by the government regulations and compliance, do you then look at those numbers and go, this is the minimum we have to achieve? Or do you set things a bit more advanced to kind of maintain that leadership that you spoke about, to kind of be that leader in the change in the sustainability side? Do you take those goals one step further and then look at how you can, as a company, from a culture point of view, really achieve that?
Yeah, if you look at the ambitions that we put on the table already, and we've communicated we're going to be net zero by 2050, we're going to be 100% sustainable by 2050. That's industry leading. No other manufacturer is ahead of that in terms of their targets. Despite that, it's quite a long way away. We're talking about 30 years away, almost 30 years away from today, before we're in a position where we can say we're 100% sustainable. And people will say, well, why is it taking so long? And the reality is that if you look at tyres today, the average sustainability of tyres is between 20 and 30% in the marketplace. We're producing tyres up to 40% sustainable, but there's still a big gap between there and 100. And the reason for that is that the materials that we need to replace the non-sustainable carbon-based materials or oil-based materials are just not existing today. We need to look for materials that are obviously sustainable, but the big criteria is they have to deliver the same or better performance than the material we're replacing in the tyre. They have to be available in volume. We're making 2.5 billion tyres made around the world annually, and Hankook can make over 100 million tyres a year. So we have to have reasonable volumes of these materials, and some exotic materials are potentially sustainable, potentially good in terms of performance, but they're just not available in enough volume for us to be able to use. And the final piece is the commercial viability of those alternatives. And today, quite frankly, the marketplace is not ready to pay a significantly higher price for sustainable tyres versus non-sustainable tyres. And that means any material we find that is sustainable, performant, and available has to also be commercially viable. And those four criteria are not there today for a vast majority of the materials that we're using in our tyres. So we're working really hard with material science. And we've got a lot of people in our organization looking at new materials, trying to find new compounds, trying to find ways to deliver performance, but also sustainability. We're trying to also make sure those materials are EGR compliant, deforestation compliant. We're also looking at the zero emissions production of tires. As I've mentioned, we want to be 100% sustainable by 2050 in our factories. So we're doing a lot of recycling in our factories. We're using renewable energies in our factories. We're trying to reduce water emissions in our factories. But the most significant thing that we're doing, it is the place to focus, and people don't realize this, is the usage phase of tires. If you look at the overall emissions you'll get from a tire in its life, it isn't during production, it isn't during logistics, it's when it's actually on the vehicle. Many people don't really appreciate that 30% of all the energy you put in a vehicle, whether it's diesel, petrol, or a battery charge, is used to overcome tire rolling resistance. So if we can reduce that just by 10%, we can take 3% of the fuel out of the vehicle. Doesn't sound like a huge amount, but we're talking about, for a truck here in Europe, 1,200 less litres of fuel that vehicle will use, 2.7 tonnes of CO2 that they'll save, and at an average cost of 1.7, 1.8 euro per litre these days. You're talking about 2,000 euros of fuel savings. So a small improvement in rolling resistance can make a huge benefit economically and also in terms of emissions for the user of the vehicles. So we're looking to find ways to make ultra-low rolling resistance tyres, high mileage tyres, and tyres which are no compromise in terms of the safety of those tyres from the first to the last millimetre. And that is not easy to do. That involves an awful lot of technical innovation. We're doing all of those things. And at the same time, and in parallel with that, developing specific tyres for electric vehicles. Because as I mentioned at the very start of this discussion, electric vehicles are very different from traditional vehicles in terms of the requirements for the tyres. So we believe, and we're alone, I think, at the moment in the industry, that we have to have specific electric vehicle tyres, not fitting EV-ready or EV-OK tyres to those new generation of vehicles. So we launched specific EV tyres for car, Ion range in 2022, and we launched specific EV truck tyres this year, under a brand name of eSmart. And we're alone in that particular endeavour, so that's a differentiator for Hankook. We're taking the EV specific tyre route. Our competitors tend to be going for EV-OK tyres, and I think we've already seen surveys of traditional tyres on EV vehicles having wear rates 20 or 30% faster than EV-specific tyres on those same vehicles. So that's the reason why we're going down that route of developing EV-specific tyres. So a lot of things happening in the industry, a lot of things happening inside of Hankook. Yeah. I think it's the most dynamic period in my career in tyres over 30 years, and I honestly think we're going to see more change in our industry in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 20 years in terms of product development and technologies.
And I think that a lot of that obviously has to do with the technology available to do that. And I do want to touch on the technology piece. But before I do, just on the point you mentioned there, these challenges come up and you want to meet, sustainability goals and use resources that are, what you need to be doing from the forestation and all the materials, make sure they're sustainable. When a challenge like that comes up, now there's going to be a change in processes. There's going to be a change in the product you make. But how do you find that opportunity? Because you're looking to, like you said, increasing or decreasing the rolling resistance rate, all these things that would be a challenge with materials that you're already familiar with. But now you're having to change that whole chemistry side of it and still advance the product and keep prices competitive. That's a difficult balance to do. How do you and your team sort of approach that?
You're right. As I mentioned, it's the most dynamic period I think I've ever seen in my career. We've got so many drivers for change in our industry with the new vehicles, the new regulations. Also, the actual customers are much more demanding than they ever were today. They're using their vehicles for more hours of the day. They're demanding much more economic solutions because the industry is significantly challenged in terms of profitability. We're also seeing a lot more drive towards connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles coming down the line. So there's so many reasons why we need to change our industry. And in a normal world, it would be quite challenging for us to be able to meet those challenges. But the reality today is that we're quite fortunate that we've got enabling technologies which are just arriving at a time which, if we use those technologies to our advantage, we can make a huge step change in terms of our performance. And we recognized this trend probably 5 or 6 years ago when I joined Hankook. I think one of the first things that we did was to buy 3D printed companies, metal printing companies, because we recognized that the future of tyres will be in 3D tread patterns. We've also done a lot of work in terms of partnership and also acquisition of AI and supercomputing capability, because this is a whole new area of opportunity for us to optimize tread patterns, optimize tire design, optimize rubber compounds and material usage. We're seeing it in medical use as well, where they're finding new drugs and new solutions for illnesses through using AI, and we see this do exactly the same inside of the tire industry. So we're combining those, and then with the new materials that I've already mentioned, if you combine materials with 3D tread patterns and also AI, aided design and prototyping, combining those technologies, we're seeing the possibility to produce tires which are 20% better than the previous generation. Now, in all my history, and I've been around 30 years, I've been launching tires into the marketplace which are usually 1 or 2 or 3% better in 1 or 2 of the key criteria. So the evolution of tires has been quite slow since John Boyd Dunlop designed the first tire more than 130 years ago. It's been quite slow to where we are today. We're seeing a huge uptick in terms of the ability of us to be able to deliver much, much better performance because of those newly arriving technologies. So the companies that have the ambition, the companies that have the vision, and the companies that have the dynamism to invest early enough in those technologies and then combine them can make a huge jump in terms of performance. And that's exactly where we are now in Hankook. We're renewing all of our product ranges in our passenger car and also in our truck and bus businesses, using all of those technologies to make a huge jump in performance. So we're able to meet the needs of the marketplace and meet the needs of those new vehicle requirements because of those enabling technologies. So it's a crazy exciting time to be out in the industry.
Absolutely, and extremely dynamic, like you mentioned there. To go back to the point of the technologies, obviously you're combining a lot of different technologies, AI, you mentioned 3D printing, supercomputing. With all of the demand for change and with all of the regulatory expectations and these ambitious goals, this wouldn't be possible without the technology being at the level it is today, right? From your point of view, if you're not optimizing your processes and your production processes and your design and your research and everything using all these new solutions and types of technology, at this point you're left behind. Or like you said, you've been doing this 3 or 4 years already, implementing some of this stuff. If it's still just a thought, you're too late at this point, right?
Well, I think I use another analogy with tires these days, and I think they're more like mobile phones than tires. And if I tried to sell you an Apple iPhone 1 or an old analog Nokia phone, you'd think I was crazy. The functionality of the phone is evolving so quickly that the life cycle of a phone that's launched today will probably be 18 months before the next version comes out. It'll have much more functionality because technology is moving very quickly. Tires are like that today. If you're buying a tire that was designed 3 or 4 years ago, you're missing out, because today tires that we're producing, we probably couldn't produce and design and develop even 18 months ago. That's how quickly the technology is moving. I'll just give you a few examples. Tire designers are the rock stars of our industry. These are the guys and girls that know all the secrets. They know the compound technology, they know the tire design, how to optimize performance. Some of the most highly paid people in our industry as well, for good reason. We've now got AI sitting alongside of these tire designers, and the AI understands all of the tire designers that have ever worked inside Hankook. And those AI systems are actually giving recommendations to the tire designers to say, well, maybe you should try this, and maybe you should try that, or if you try this, maybe you'll get this result, or you've tried that, and maybe you should try another solution. It's like having 200, 300 tire designers sitting on the right-hand side of our current tire designers giving recommendations. That's just an evolution and an innovation that's happened in the last 12 or 18 months prior to the reduction in the cost of supercomputing and the evolutions of AI. It wasn't possible to do that. It just wouldn't be practical economically. Now we can do it. So that's just one small example of how we can use new technologies to optimize the design of our tires. We're also using supercomputers to digitally design the tires, where in the old days, our tire designers, they would design the tire, they would then produce a real rubber tire, we'd put on a real truck or bus or car, and we'd drive it around a real road, and we'd get feedback from the driver to say it was good or it was bad, and what was the results of the innovation that the designer had put into the tire design. And that would take 6 months sometimes to get that feedback in terms of mileage performance. You don't get that in 5 minutes. So today we can actually design a tire using supercomputers. We can create a digital tire, not a real one. We can put on a digital truck on a digital road and get results about that. Modifications to the tire compound, the tire tread pattern, or any modification we've made, innovation we've made, and we know what the result is immediately. So you can imagine we can do 1,000 what-if analysis on our tire design which would have taken 1,000 years before, but we can do that in maybe an hour or 2 hours using supercomputing. Combining that with AI, you can imagine the sort of the innovations and the revolution you can create in terms of improving the tread compounds, improving the tread patterns. Then we bring in 3D. Now, in the past, tyre designers were always compromised in terms of the design they could put into the tread pattern because the tyre had to be produced from a mold, and the mold had to be produced by machines, by drilling and grinding away the materials. And obviously that means that you can't have very intricate tread patterns. You can't do that. You can't get the machine which won't get into those really nooks and crannies and create those really detailed tread patterns. Now we've got 3D metal printed molds. We can produce almost any tread pattern you like. You can hide features underneath the tread that you can't see in the new tyre, but as the tyre is wearing, those features arise. And that gives you new gripping surfaces. It also gives you air conditioning inside of the tyre when it's in its new condition, which keeps the tyre cold, which is great for tread wear, and it's also great for rolling resistance. So all of these technologies, AI plus 3D printing plus digital twinning, we call it digital design, you can imagine combining those three things together, you can see huge gains in performance. And then you add on top of that new materials. So that's why those four technologies we've talked about, when you're combining them in the way that we're doing, we're able to produce products which are far better than we could ever produce even 1 year ago. And next year, we'll probably produce products we couldn't produce this year because the advances in technology are so fast now, faster than ever in my history in this industry. And we're seeing the same in the vehicle space as well. So everybody's moving so fast. And your point earlier about, the people who don't invest will find themselves outpaced very quickly. I mean, we know Charles Darwin said quite well, it's not the fastest, it's not the fittest today that will survive. It's those that adapt most quickly to a changing environment. And today we're losing 2,000 animal species every year because we're changing the environment at a faster pace than it's ever been in the history of the world. And in the industry that we're in tyres and mobility, the environment is changing faster than it's ever done in probably the last, definitely in history. And that means that the people that are slow to adapt will find themselves outpaced, and they will not thrive and they will not survive. And big companies will not survive in the motor sector. Big companies will not survive in the tyre sector unless they invest in these new technologies, unless they position themselves to be innovators and moving from being just tyre people to tyres to sensors to mobility solution providers, which is the way that we will go inside of Hankook. So we've already invested, we've bought companies, we've done a lot of partnerships with companies to get that capability. And now we're launching into the marketplace all our new generation products in for normal cars and also for electric vehicles using those four technologies. So all of our, pretty much something like 87% of all the truck and bus tyres we sell now in Europe are 3D printed. No other manufacturer in the world is selling that kind of volume of 3D printed products. All of our new generation tyres are AI and digital twin designed with new materials. So if you're buying a tyre that's a few years old, you're buying an iPhone 1. And we only sell iPhone 10 or 11, whatever the model is today, but it's the latest version. And next year we'll sell iPhone 12. That's the plan inside the market.
It's so crazy to hear about some of these things. It makes sense with the technology you have. I'll be honest, it's giving me assurance. And no word of a lie, like not even because I'm speaking to you. I literally just bought a set of new Hankook tires. You've just given me so much more assurance that I have the latest and greatest piece of technology on my car. So that's good on a personal note. How does this type of technology affect the competitiveness of the industry? You've worked at a few of the big companies now, the big guys. Is everyone doing this? Is everyone thinking this way? Is everyone innovating? Is it kind of an innovation battleground on who can find the right balance of new technologies right now? Or is what you're describing sort of the new standard and the new benchmarks that everyone has to meet?
It's an interesting question. And as an observer of the industry, I've been around a long time and I've worked in some big companies in our industry. I'd have to say that I see some of those guys going in a direction that makes sense. They're making investments in 3D and a lot of the things we've talked about. I also see some of those guys who appear to be sitting on their hands and not really making those investments. There are also some newer entrants into the marketplace that are very ambitious. And I think the barrier to entry for people in the new world, which is not only going to be around tyres, because our future is not only going to be selling tyres, we're going to be moving into tyres plus sensors plus data into mobility solutions. The reason for that is as we move more towards higher autonomy in vehicles and eventually full autonomy in vehicles, today when we're driving, and when you're driving your Hankook a shod car, you'll be looking at the windscreen, at the road condition, you'll be looking at the weather conditions. In the future, when you're sitting in the back and the car is autonomously driving, nobody is looking at that windscreen. Vision systems can't monitor the road condition, and they can't monitor weather conditions accurately because they get affected very badly by weather. So the component that touches the road is the best positioned component to give information about road condition, about tire condition, about friction rates, about weather. And it will give that information in real time to the car, and the car will then make informed decisions about speed and cornering to optimize the speed of the vehicle. This is the next step for us, and we'll have those sensors built into our tires. We'll actually get the data off those tires, provide actionable information to these autonomous vehicles. So that's a move from tires into tires and technology and tires as a service and tires as a mobility partner for the larger companies, the Teslas of this world, the Ubers of this world that are going to have huge fleets of autonomous vehicles, because we will one day move away from car ownership. So that's the part of the story that we understand very well, and we're already investing in today in Hankook to build our capability. And it's another reason why we're in Formula E, because we have some of those sensors in play in Formula E today, and it's obviously a high-tech industry and a very, very challenging environment, which is much more like the EV environment we're going to have in the future when everything's going to be autonomous. So it makes real sense for us to be in that Formula today so we can test some of our capability. So we're getting ready for that future. And the reality is, if you're a manufacturer that's investing and moving in that direction and you have the right capability, then you have a chance to become a mobility partner for those big players. If you're not moving in that direction, you might end up being a commodity supplier to somebody that has that capability, and that is not a good place to be for a premium manufacturer like Hankook, because we're not low cost. I mean, we've got a certain amount of cost in our organization, so we have to be able to generate good revenue. So we really have to make sure that we are one of those mobility solution providers. Your question was, are all the guys out there doing it? And the answer is no. I see some of them doing it and some of them not doing it. I also see some of the new entrants coming, and some of the Chinese brands, some of the new brands coming out of India, for example. They're very ambitious in this space also. And we already see it in the automotive industry with BYD. There's a big presence here in Europe. Tesla is a disruptor in the industry also. They came from nowhere, taking over all the market share from the incumbents. And we'll see the same thing happening in a lot of areas of our industry. I think people that are most dynamic will win. And the people that understand that future and are also willing to invest in that future in terms of capability and people, they're the people that are going to be the ones that thrive and survive. And there'll be a lot that will fall by the wayside. It's a big battle. I talk about it as an arms race in our industry. There's a genuine arms race between us and all of the premium manufacturers and also some new entrants to see how we can leverage all these technologies to be a key player in the future. It's a genuine arms race between us and our premium manufacturing competitors on a lot of them.
It's so cool to hear it from that perspective too, and I guess it makes a lot of sense that it is such a race, but on a technology front. Do you think technology has, I mean, you mentioned it's removed a lot of barriers for newcomers to get into the game and to be at that high level, just like the automotive industry, where we see, a car manufacturer that's 10 years old, 5 years old, already competing for certain markets. On the tire side, do you feel like technology has leveled the playing field a bit? Like it's made it much more competitive than it's ever been, given your years of experience?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, in the past, most of the innovations in our industry were coming from the high-level premium players because they had a lot more intellectual property. They had a lot more experience around material science and all of these traditional skills and competencies you needed to be a premium manufacturer. The reality is, if you now embrace the new technologies, you can jump over that capability, because using AI, for example, no manufacturer in the world doing it in a traditional way has got 250 tire designers sitting alongside their current tire designers. They haven't got all their history. And nobody in the world has got AI to support them in terms of material compounding technologies. Nobody in the world has got the ability in the past to be able to do 3D printing, which is not technology that was available. Now we can invest in that technology and jump over those manufacturers. And that's really what's happening right now. You're getting the people that are willing to invest and combine those technologies, having the capability of improving by 20%. And the gap between most people and the highest level premiums is much lower than 20%. So that means that you can jump to be in a benchmark position when you leverage those technologies. And that's exactly what we're targeting. Our strategies are very simple in Europe, in the European market. We want to leverage all the technologies, renew all our products to offer all of our customers absolute benchmark performance, better than anybody else in the marketplace. And also those technologies can mean that we can operate efficiently. These technologies don't necessarily add a huge amount of cost to our operations, so we can offer benchmark products at a very competitive price. And that's a really compelling argument when you go up against those premiums that in the past had a performance advantage because of their knowledge of the industry and their long-standing understanding. As I mentioned, there's a real parallel between what you're seeing in tires and what you're seeing in vehicles. The big guys in the more automotive industry, the Fords, Jaguars, the Volkswagens, the BMWs, and Mercedes always had a big advantage because there were huge barriers to entry for new entrants. Now we're moving towards electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are not so complex. And new entrants can come into that space and they can bring innovations into that space where it's much more technology-led than engine and transmission, all of those things that were the USP of those incumbent manufacturers. So the barrier to entry is much lower, and the ability to innovate and differentiate yourself in terms of performance is much higher than it's ever been. And that means the field is open for people who have the ambition, and also the field is open for new entrants to enter the marketplace, which is happening right now. And that's why I said previously, we're going to see some quite disruptive situation in our marketplace. And I think we're going to see some of those really big names disappear from our markets in the automotive area and also in tires. And you'll see some new people come that we haven't heard of yet. And some of the people you've heard of, perhaps you consider to be lower level operators, will find themselves at the top because they've invested in technology and they've embraced the opportunity. If you Google Technodome, Technoplex, Technoring, these are three facilities we built in Korea over the last 5 or 10 years. And just look at those buildings. They look like something out of science fiction. And the people inside of those buildings and the buildings themselves are a statement from Hankook. And their statement is that Hankook isn't around to be a fast follower. Hankook is around to be a benchmark player, to be the pioneer and the leader of the industry. And they're investing to make it happen. So I'm very confident that Hankook is going to be one of those companies that does make it to become one of those mobility solution partners for the really big players in the future. But I'm also confident about some of the competitors. In fact, I did actually tune a presentation at the Tire Technology Conference in Hanover about 3 years ago, show an envelope. It says on 2030, I'm going to open the envelope, and I predicted a couple of names that I think will still be significant players by 2030. Hankook's one of those names. There were 3 names in the envelope. 2 of them you probably know, but one of them you would imagine would be in the envelope. But I will open the envelope in 2030 and figure out whether my predictions were correct. But the reality is there's a lot of names that aren't in the envelope because I don't have a good strategy.
That's crazy to hear. It is like, I mean, that's how an evolution of an industry happens, right? Something changes things. You either adapt properly or you sit on your hands, like you said. Maybe some are, and others come up and take the place. I mean, it's just this constant cycle. But as technology sort of levels that field, I guess this happens a lot faster. You're saying, when in the past it was a lot of experience and intellectual property and maybe proprietary manufacturing processes, but now that's all leveled, and technology allows you have to be on top of it at all times. Otherwise, someone's going to come and take your place without a second's notice, I guess, which is kind of, what you're saying as well. This change can happen so quickly.
Yeah. You're right, yeah. I mean, the reality of our marketplace right now is it's quite a challenged place. We've had a lot of shocks in the industry of mobility. COVID, obviously, was a huge shock for us. We've got a pretty uncertain geopolitical situation globally these days. Here in Europe, we've got quite a few countries that are in recession, and we've got a war on our shores here in Europe. So it's not an easy time to be in this industry. That situation is leading a lot of fleets, a lot of consumers to have to make some quite difficult choices about how they are to keep their businesses in operation and profitable. And that means that they are starting to look at every opportunity to try and find savings. So in that scenario, it's a perfect opportunity for those people that can offer better performance at a cost-competitive price than perhaps the older guard who are charging a very, very high price for a performance premium. But unfortunately, that performance premium is no longer there because people have been able to catch them up much quicker because they're using the technologies. And this is really the arms race that's happening right now in terms of tires. We're part of that story. And then alongside that, as I mentioned, we've got this second area, which is the transition of the companies from tires to tire sense and data companies. And that's another area of huge opportunity. It hasn't really started in the marketplace yet because we're still not in a position where we're seeing full autonomous vehicles. And in the next 2, 3, 4 years, that will start to happen. And you'll start to see those tire makers becoming tires plus sensors plus data companies, and that's a whole new battleground that we're all working to try to make sure we're relevant in. So yeah, it's probably the most dynamic period in the mobility industry that I've ever seen in my career. Huge opportunities, but also huge threats for those people that don't innovate quick enough or think that they've got a performance advantage that will last, or a brand equity that will be strong enough to resist new incumbents coming with better performance at a much more competitive price and higher technologies at a much more competitive price. We've seen the warning signs of what's probably going to happen in the tire industry from the automotive industry, as I've already mentioned a few times. And you're seeing Tesla's market share growing very strongly across Europe. It's taking that market share from the premium segment of the market. BYD is a new entrant into our marketplace now, and they're already taking quite a lot of market share in North America and market share here in Western Europe, because they're bringing a product that's very competitive and also very high tech and really challenging those incumbents. And this is, if you like, a warning sign of what we're going to see in the tyre segment sector as well. So yeah, it's for those people that are ambitious, brave, and willing to invest, the future is bright. But for those people that aren't or think they can survive, they should really read that statement from Darwin. There's some strong species that are no longer on this planet, and there's some really big companies, around that are no longer on this planet because they just didn't adapt quickly enough to what was usually an evolutionary environment. Now it's a revolutionary environment. And that means you have to move much more quickly to stay relevant. And if you want to outpace your competition, you have to really go fast. So speed and dynamism is more important today than ever, really.
Yeah, that willingness to adapt. I think a lot of people fight that a little bit too hard, too long. And then by the time they decide, they're already in last place. And then it's kind of a very much of an uphill battle. And I think it's a good point to bring up BYD, right? It's a product that came out of nowhere, and you see them everywhere in the main shops now in these big centers. You see the cars. I've driven a few of them myself. This is where other cars will now chase, and they came out of nowhere. And I guess if you're saying that's going to be the same for the tire industry, just a little bit, second phase of that, I think that's a really nice comparison of where to look. What could happen to you if your spot on the floor is going to be taken if you're not chasing it. So I think that's a really interesting point to bring up. The very last point, and we did touch on this a little bit, so we don't want to spend too much time on it, but I know you're going to have a pretty good response to it in general, is the response to the economic situation. Now, you mentioned obviously in Europe what we have going on here, the sustainability all ties into this, but how are you and the Hankook team responding to the economic challenges, specifically here when we look at the demand for more efficient mobility solutions on the market for tires?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's an awful lot of challenges in the marketplace globally. Also, definitely here in Europe, markets have been generally depressed for 2 or 3 years now in terms of volume. And tires are a bit of a bellwether for the economy. And the reality is that more than 80% of all the goods transported around Europe are being transported on road transportation. So when people are no longer buying those goods because their local economic situation is poor, or their belief and their perception of the future outlook is weak, then that means there are less cars used. So in that scenario where the marketplace is shrinking, if you are ambitious, like Hankook is, to keep growing the company, and we are growing the company, our only chance really is to win competitors' market share. We have to take business from our competitors. We're not going to get organic growth from the marketplace. So that's really where we're focused. We're looking at ways to try to make sure that we can differentiate ourselves, quite frankly, and say, well, okay, you're using these brands today. We believe that we have a proposition which is significantly better in terms of the economics of use, significantly better in terms of the performance of use, and also significantly better in terms of the environmental use. And as I mentioned, combining those technologies where we can increase mileage performance by 20%, we can increase fuel efficiency by 20%, we can increase wet grip and stopping distance by 15 or 20%, not only when the tire is in its new condition, but also when it's 2/3 or fully worn, because 3D printing means you can grab new channels, new grooves, new grip inserters that appear as if by magic in the tire because they're hidden inside of the tread panel. This is 3D printing enables these kind of technologies. That means also you're going to get great grip, but you're also going to get a cold running tire because there's air and water circulating inside the tire when it's in its new condition. Colder tires have a lower rolling resistance. Colder tires wear more slowly. So you get more mileage, you get more fuel efficiency, and you also get much better wet grip later in the tire's life. these kind of innovations weren't available to us only a few years ago, and that's helped us to be able to differentiate ourselves now and say, you can buy tyres at this price from our premium competitors. You can buy tyres at a price that's probably less than that from others, and our technology is higher than that. Our performance is higher than theirs, not only when they're new, but also when they're fully bought. So that's really what the game's all about. It's trying to differentiate ourselves to prove that we are benchmark performance by leveraging all of those technologies. Then we have to invest. We have to invest in the technologies themselves. We have to invest in people. We're investing in warehousing. We're building factories. We announced last year that we're building a new factory here in Europe. So growth is strong. We're also investing in new sales processes because we have to prove our performance to the marketplace. We started this conversation by saying there's a lot of apathy around tyres in the marketplace. We have to go out there and actually explain it to our customers, explain it to people and prove it to them that we can deliver much better performance than our competitors. And we're promoting our brand as well, things like the Europa brand. So things like the Formula E and WRC will start with Hankook Tires next year. So if we achieve that through those investments, then we have a really good chance to be successful, even at a time when theoretically we should be struggling because the marketplace is depressed. People are thinking twice about whether they want to buy tyres. We're winning market share off our competitors by differentiating ourselves with all those technologies. And I think that's the right strategy right now. Deliver the best possible performance at an affordable price. And that's enough to differentiate yourself to win competitors' share and keep your growth, which will then fuel more investments to accelerate that growth and also invest in those future sensors and data pieces that we talked about with fully autonomous vehicles.
It's great to see that level of diversity that you guys are going for. It's not just one challenge you're trying to accomplish, but it's really a whole array, and you're making it very much sound like, the whole industry has a reason to be chasing what you're doing from a process point of view down to a product point of view. And then at the end of the day, as well as an education point of view for consumers, both the regular passenger vehicles and the commercial side as well. It's really nice to see that you're pushing yourselves rather than just chasing someone else. I think that's a really nice approach to it. And from a cultural point of view, that must be something that the whole team must revel in. Like, you go down to the floor and you see your entire team, whether it's in the back offices doing the behind the scenes work or people on the floor, your involvement in Formula E and the rally, like you said. I think it must really motivate everyone in the team.
Yeah, I've worked now for 6 years in this company, and quite quickly I learned the Korean culture is very hardworking, very professional guys and girls in the company, but they are very, very ambitious people. You only have to see what they've done in the car space with Kia and also in the electronic space with Hyundai and Samsung. That these guys, they're not in this game to be followers. They're in this game to be leaders. And that's the mentality inside the company. And thankfully, they understand what the future is going to look like for mobility. They're making some big bets and some big investments to make sure that we're capable to be able to deliver on that future. And then it's a case of me and the rest of the guys and girls here in Europe being able to deliver that strategy, deliver the growth necessary, the revenues necessary to make all of those investments. So yeah, right, it's a holistic approach. It involves factories, it involves R&D, it involves partnerships, it involves people, it involves systems, warehouses. We're working on all of those fronts to make sure that we are one of those relevant companies in 2030, 2040, 2050. And I would say a pretty good bet that we will be one of successful companies in the arms race. As I mentioned several times, there's some that probably won't be as successful because I don't see that same level of dynamism, the same level of ambition. So in my 6 years, I have to say I've seen more change. I've managed to work with guys and girls delivering more change and more innovation than I probably did in the last 27 years of my career in tyres. And I think we're going to see more innovation in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years in our industry because of all of those technologies and the move towards autonomous electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles perhaps also. So it's an exciting time to be around in the industry. I wish I was 10 or 15 years younger because it would be great to hang around in this industry for over 10 or 15 years and more to make all these things happen. A bit too old.
Well, it certainly doesn't sound like you're behind, and it certainly sounds like you're operating as if you are any age you wish to be from that dynamic point of view. And I think that the level of excitement just motivates you further, right? No matter where you are in your career at this point in the industry, the level of change and the level of how quickly things are evolving, almost takes years off your life as far as like energy and motivation.
Yeah, it's much more fun working in a place where every day you're asked to try and deliver huge growth and find ways to be successful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of the other manufacturers around Europe these days, they recognize that it's going to be very difficult for them to grow their market share, very difficult for them to increase their prices, very difficult for them to find additional revenue from their tire businesses. So what's tending to happen is they're restructuring those organizations to try and find ways to reduce their costs. And that isn't such an exciting prospect as a leader in the industry. If you're in those companies, if you're inside of Hankook, we've got completely different objectives around growth and investment in people, adding cost if necessary to the company to be able to deliver the future. It's a completely different dynamic than what you might find in some of those other manufacturers. So I have to say it's a more fun place to be. It's a big train set to be playing with and an exciting time, but it's a much more fun place to be looking for ways to grow and invest, and innovate, and then find ways to restructure and reduce costs to try to grow a margin.
Yeah. The less fun part of it. It seems like what you guys are doing, the more fun side of it, definitely. And I think that's what a lot of players can aspire to aim for, right? I think that's at the end of the day what everyone should aspire for, to innovate and have fun with it and not have to worry about the negative sides, as you just alluded to there. Fantastic. Well, listen, I think this is, my notepad is just completely full. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Guy. Thank you so very much for the insights. Hopefully the audience took away a fraction of what I did, and we're going to be in a better place in a world and helping to shape what the world looks like in the future, rather than just build towards it. So yeah, a massive, massive thank you from my side. I really, really appreciate the talk. Before we wrap up, any final notes from your side? Anything that you wanted to mention that we may have missed?
I think my final comment would be, and it's a way to circle back to the other role that I have in life, which is around Transaid. Transaid are actually delivering mobility solutions to Sub Saharan communities where there is no mobility. So some of the things that we're doing at the moment, trying to produce things like bicycle ambulances to help people to get to medical aid. If they were walking, the chances are the child with malaria would die on the journey. So bicycle ambulances are real lifesavers. Sounds crazy. And it's one of the issues we've got generally here in the West, is that we take for granted the mobility industry. We got a few wake-up calls. We had a wake-up call during COVID when the only people keeping the oxygen in the hospitals, keeping the water, keeping the food in the supermarkets were the truck drivers and the bus drivers taking the medical people to the facilities. I don't know whether it's the same where you are, but in Europe, a lot of people were out clapping the medical people every Thursday night, say thank you for all your work you're doing during COVID. We didn't clap the truck drivers. People didn't appreciate that those guys and girls were still out there, still keeping us in water and keeping us alive. And the reality is that mobility for humans is like water to a fish. Fish don't realize how important water is until it's not there anymore. And often we don't realize how important our mobility industry is until it's not there anymore. And we really should find ways to make sure that we use every opportunity we can to explain to people mobility is an essential part of life. It's a key to prosperity. It's a key to future growth of our economies and our lives and livelihoods. And if people understood that, then they probably wouldn't be quite so reluctant to pay for tires, and they probably wouldn't be so reluctant and so anti truck drivers. Quite often I hear truck drivers saying they feel like second-class citizens because they're given and complaining about being on the roads. We need to really get people to understand the importance of this industry better so that we can get more value in the industry. Man, there's no better way of understanding that when you go to a place where there is no mobility. And I quite often go to Africa doing cycle challenges. In fact, I'll be in Kenya in October cycling across Kenya. When you come across communities where there is no mobility, and they really do understand the importance of being able to get to medical services in time, or get food in time, or get water in time. So as a closing comment, I would say let's work harder as an industry to try and explain to everybody out there how important our industry is. If we achieve that, I'm sure that we can get more value around the industry, and hopefully people will to accept and understand why they pay a higher price for a premium product, whether it's a truck, bus, or whether it's a tire.
Yeah, more appreciation, and I think it's great work that you're doing down in Africa as well. Again, for those listening, just head down to the comments. You'll see we'll have a link down there for Transaid, and you can learn a little bit more about the work Guy's doing with them there, and have that bit more of appreciation. And Yeah, I think it's a great point. We don't say thank you to the truck drivers. Maybe that's a nice call to action for everyone to do, just level of appreciation a little bit more than we have in the past. These people keeping the industry running around the world. If without that, like you said, a fish without water, us without mobility on the road, it'd be a certain wake up call. That's for sure. So I think it's a nice point to end on, and yeah, one to reflect on a little bit as well. So I'll certainly take my time to do that. But listen, again, Guy, coming back to it, big thank you for today. Thank you so much for the insights. Congratulations to all the work where you're doing it at Hankook as well. And I'm happy that I have 4 new ones on my tire, on my car. That makes me feel good. I feel better about that already. It's obviously a daunting purchase, but now I feel good about it. So I'm set as sure this is good. But yeah, again, really appreciate your time today and wish you a fantastic rest of the summer. Safe travels down in Kenya when you do the cycle, and look forward to connecting with you again. I think we'll be at IAA in Germany. I'll definitely come and say hello, but I'm over the moon with the conversation. So yeah, once again, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Mark, and also thank you for your confidence in the Hankook brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you very much for joining us on this episode. Hopefully you have taken away a lot of information, a lot to reflect on, and a lot to think about within maybe your own processes. Whether you're in the tire industry, the automotive industry, wherever you are, I think the message is resounding that you can't sit on your hands. You need to be actively looking at how you're optimizing your processes with technology, how you're setting that new standard, how you're benchmarking yourself, not only to regulatory changes, but to your own standards. I think that's a great message no matter where you are in the industry. But great work Hankook's doing, and it's great to have them on the show today. So with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Lots of links down in the podcast notes, so head down there and click away. We'll see you on the next episode of the Auto Tech Show very soon. Again, thank you all for being with me. See you soon.